Hey there, Twins fans, especially if you still want to admit that right now. We still do, I think, and I maybe shouldn't talk to myself, but thank you for joining the post-game pint. Um, I wish I had something more than Diet Dr. Pepper here today. But again, we're brought to you today by Soda Stick. Go to at Soda Stick Co. or at sodastick.com. They've got great stuff for Twins fans, Vikings fans, the great t-shirts, sweatshirts, everything you could possibly want. So be sure to go do that. Support Soda Stick and sodastick.com. I'm joined right now by Matthew Trueblood, and shortly Matthew Taylor will be joining us. As we're watching right now, the Twins are down to their final out. Down 3-1 to Houston in what a depressing game for the Twins and their fans. So with that, I'll bring in Matthew Trueblood. Matthew, I mean, how you doing? How you feeling?
I'm, deflated. I think that's the best word. Not fully depressed, but just this was a chance for something really exciting. Again, we've had a few chances for that lately, and it just never seems to live up to it. It's not just losing; it's not coming close to winning. It's not even holding late leads, not even winning a game and then blowing a lead in the series. Just hard to watch, but it's going to be an interesting offseason.
Well, no question. Again, want to welcome those who are watching as the game is finishing here. We've got a lot of people, and whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, leave your comments, and we'll discuss those. Try to keep PG, please, and let's be civil. But I agree. I think you used deflating, and that's exactly how I feel right now. We were talking before the show about how I've kind of said all year that a 60-game season, kind of anything can happen. There's no doubt that in a best 2 out of 3 series, anything can happen. We didn't know how the divisions played against each other or would play against each other. I mean, I don't sit here thinking that Houston, who has now won 3-1, is a better team than the Twins. But for these 2 games, it wasn't even close. And we'll have plenty to discuss today. Like I said, I think Matthew Taylor is going to join us. Before we get going, I'm going to bring in the game log here, and basically this is how it went. The Twins got a good start today from Jose Barrios. I thought he was terrific. Unfortunately, he gave up 1 run in the 4th inning, and the Twins were able to tie it up. However, I think one thing we can certainly talk about is Barrios being pulled after 5 innings, looking really good at 75 pitches. Cody Stashak looked really good in the 6th and threw the first 2 outs, but he gave up the Carlos Correa home run in the 7th. And from there, things just kind of went bad to worse. We had Eddie Rosario getting ejected. We're going to have plenty of things to talk about throughout this show. So again, please leave your questions. We'll discuss those things. Jorge Polanco strikes out looking to end the game on a pitch that didn't look too terribly bad. So, I just feel like we had a ton to talk about. So let's start with that. And let's first bring in Matthew Taylor. And Matthew, feel free to give us your, I don't know, what's your headline? How you feeling about right now?
Yeah, it's the offense. 2 runs in 2 games. You're not going to win. The pitching showed up. The bats didn't. And I think that's the story. There's other things, but the main story is just the offense looking completely lifeless.
Yeah. So let's try to be positive, and let's start with Barrios. Through 3 innings, he had 29 pitches. And then I think he threw 31, 32 pitches in the 4th inning, but he had a strong 5th inning. 5 innings for Barrios. I thought he looked real good. Just 75 pitches, and he came out. I know Tom Fromming posted his statistics the 3rd time through the lineup. So, Trueblood, I mean, what was your thought as you're watching the game? And now as you kind of step back and it's over at this point, the season's over. What are your thoughts on pulling Barrios after 5?
I think it's certainly not what I would have done. Not only you can understand it from the perspective of he's going the around for a third time through the order. The Astros do still have a tough lineup, underperform though they have throughout the year. It's tricky to balance going through a third time when you didn't have a margin for error. But I would have stuck with him. He was only at 75 pitches. He was sort of almost looking better as the game went along. And the way he came off the field after that fifth inning, firing up, shouting to the dugout, really trying to be the spark, then to lift him, I think it made the game a little too long for the bullpen. Not that Stashak, that's just something that'll happen to Cody Stashak sometimes, and you've got to score more than one run, and that would have changed the story. But I would have asked him for another inning. I think he would have done well with it, but I understand why Rocco went the way he did. And again, ultimately, that's not really what lost you the game.
100% true. I agree with that. Matthew, did you obviously there's the moment when it happens and he comes out, you see Baldelli talking to him, patting him on the shoulder, basically telling him you're done. What were your thoughts at that point? And have you had a chance to kind of alter that thought at all?
Yeah, it's just funny how similarly this game played out to the game yesterday. And it was the same thing with Maeda yesterday. Do you leave him in for another inning? Barrios was at less pitches today than Maeda was yesterday. But again, it was going through the order for the third time. And what do you do? And yesterday I understood it with a full fresh bullpen of Duffy, May, Rogers, all of your guys that you've leaned on all year. I think I might have been more willing to go with Barrios again, given the 75 pitches and just knowing that the guy you're going to next is Cody Stashak, who's been solid all year, but he struggled with injuries. He wasn't necessarily consistently performing all year just because he was in and out of the roster and things like that. So I think I would have left Barrios in for another inning, but just like True Blood said, that wasn't what lost him the game. And I thought Stashak looked good. And again, the bullpen looked solid, and that wasn't the issue.
Yes, Mike Link notes that Jack Morris would not be able to pitch for this team. I hate the 5-inning starter limit. And I think we all would agree it's not a 5-inning thing. It's a twice through the lineup thing. And you look at Barrios' numbers, third time through the lineup, his OPS against jumps from 600 to 700 to over 900 that third time through the lineup. So I would have loved to have seen him go another inning. I loved when he came off the mound, as you mentioned, Matt. Pumped up and excited. I would have loved to see him get the sixth inning. But, you look at the numbers. If he would have given up 2 runs in the sixth inning, then Baldelli's getting beat up for for sticking with him for another inning instead of looking at the numbers. So you kind of, you can't win essentially. But as you both mentioned, it was not at all the pitching, I don't think, that cost them this game and this series. It all starts with the hitting. Nelson Cruz had 2 doubles, both scored runs, and that was it. That was essentially the entire offense for the team. Mr. Taylor, what words do we even use? Other than Kirilov's singles, what else did they even do?
They didn't do anything. I think they had a decent approach at the plate. I think they took some patient at-bat or plate appearances. They took some walks and had decent approach, but it was the same thing again as yesterday. They were swinging through fastballs and swinging through hanging breaking balls, and it just they weren't putting any good contact together. It was just bizarre. There's no time that you felt good about any player that was up to the plate. You didn't feel good about what was going to happen. You just didn't have any confidence. And it was unfortunate because Urquidy's not the dominant pitcher that, if it was a Shane Bieber or Lucas Giolito, you understand that. But Urquidy's a guy that the 2019 Twins would have just crushed him, and they just didn't even put up a fight. And it was disappointing, to say the least.
Matthew Trueblood, we were kind of talking, and we all want this to be the 2019 lineup. It hasn't been all year, and we kept thinking it was going to happen. It just absolutely never did. Matthew made a good point about just swinging through so many pitches. It looked very much hittable.
Yeah, and not just swinging through, but even when there was contact, and there was a fair amount of contact, it was a lot of late swings specifically. Sorry, my dog's getting a little worked up.
I don't blame her.
A lot of late swings, and that that led to some of the pop-ups and the lazy fly balls. A lot of those going the other way, or, you saw Sano in his last couple of plate appearances. They had found a spot where they just knew they could pitch it. And these were fastballs that nobody's touching triple digits on Houston's staff right now. They're just throwing him high heat up and away. And if he was getting to it at all, he was fouling it back or fouling it off to the side. And they were just late. You can ask whether that's tired bodies, whether they can't prepare the way they did last year because of coronavirus and some of the changes that forces to how you do batting practice and those kinds of things work in the cage. But one way or another, they were consistently late on stuff that needed to be hittable if you were going to generate a lot of offense.
Yeah, correct. Wanted to talk, and again, a little pre-show prep that we'll admit to, but I mentioned to you, Mr. Trueblood, beforehand that I just felt that it all kind of started just weird this morning when we saw the lineup. Buxton's not in it this time, and Baldelli's unwillingness to even express any idea. Is it concussion symptoms? Is it a shoulder thing? Would have given us an idea. Now, I know some of that's gamesmanship, but he was able to use him as a pinch runner late in the game. That was more alarming to me, I think, than anything else. What were your thoughts as far as the Buxton aspect of the lineup today?
Yeah, it's clear that he was still dealing with something, and I think to me it's pretty clear he's still dealing with concussion-like symptoms. I understand why Baldelli wouldn't want to talk about that. He's loath to characterize injuries almost all the time anyway. And now you've got the added element of really wanting to use him as a decoy, if nothing else, those kinds of things. But it certainly left for a franchise and especially a fan base that lives under this cloud of so many straight playoff losses, to start the day with, a really important player's not in the lineup, and we can't tell you why. It didn't leave you feeling right. Didn't leave you with a good, optimistic outlook on the game.
How about you, Matthew?
Yeah, it was frustrating, and I think what's frustrating is the whole season the Twins were playing the long game with the intention of getting to the postseason healthy. We saw it with not pushing their starters throughout the season. We saw it with not bringing back relievers on back-to-back days. We saw it on not pushing Buxton early in the year, and just everything was strategized throughout the season with the intent of this year we're going to get to the postseason healthy. We know we're getting in, so why don't we just make sure we get there healthy? And the process didn't quite lead to the result that they wanted. They once again sort of limped into the postseason, once again had a roster that isn't where you wanted it, even in these games where the lineup is struggling and you look to the bench to see, well, who could potentially pinch hit. You don't really have anybody on the bench. You have Garver has a right-handed potential bat who has been struggling all year, and then you have Jake Cave, who you don't necessarily trust in, and then you get Rosario kicked out of the game, and you don't really have any options left on your bench after that. So just once again, frustrating to play well throughout the season, and get to the postseason and just have limited options.
Absolutely. And real quick before we continue, I want to thank those of you who are listening. And again, we welcome your comments and questions, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We'll try to post or ask as many of those as we can get to, and I'm just going to try to keep up. So admittedly, I probably won't get to all of them, but feel free to try to ask them. Obviously, we understand the frustration, but we also want to thank Soda Stick for sponsoring the last weekend and these two playoff games for this show. Really appreciate their support, and obviously they provide a lot of fun T-shirts and shirts that we've seen the Twins wear. The Surge, the Super Rosario, all of those. So we appreciate them doing that. If you use the promo code Twins Daily, all one word, you get free shipping. So be sure to take advantage of this. Real quickly, I did want to go through the WPA. Barrios was at .158, and I think that pretty well signifies that he threw really well. Obviously gave up the one run. The other one that had pretty good positive was Nelson Cruz at 1-1-4, tied the game there with the double. Close play at the plate. Otherwise, it would have given them a lead, and he'd be even higher on this list. Both May and Duffy get some pretty good scores for their innings of work, but obviously Taylor Rogers did not. You look at through these numbers, Kepler minus 0.128, Buxton minus 0.072, and he didn't even come to the plate. Cave had just the one at bat. Sano, even Kirilloff. And that's where I wanted to go next with our conversation. Alex Kirilloff, nothing like throwing a guy in there, Again, a little on-air discussion of our pre-show discussion, but Matt and I were talking about kind of the things that are going into this. First, he becomes the third player ever in Major League history to make his Major League debut in the playoffs. He becomes the first person to start a game, and he's doing that in an elimination game where the team's offense is doing nothing, and he's touted for his unbelievable hitting. And then to wind up in the first inning being a guy who comes to the plate with the bases loaded and 2 outs, kind of duplicating what happened the day before when the Twins left runners and the bases loaded, and kind of just let the whole day go the same way. But, I mean, that's a tough place to throw a guy, but, I mean, Baldelli was clear. He had full confidence in him being in the lineup. Matt Taylor, what were your thoughts on Kirilloff getting the start today, especially understanding, or I guess as we've just discussed, not understanding why Buxton wasn't in the lineup? And, what were your thoughts on how he did?
Yeah, so the two options you had once you find out Buxton is out in the outfield is you're going to put in Jake Cave or you're going to put in Alex Kirilloff. I like the move with Kirilloff. It's just you're not getting anything from the offense, and he's a spark plug who has the sweetest swing in the organization, as Seth Stos has told us multiple times. So I don't mind that move at all. My sort of frustration with it is just I wish they would have given Kirilloff a chance at least in this last weekend of the series. If you had any inkling that, I mean, it was Friday night of the last weekend that both Donaldson and Buxton were injured. And at that point, they called up one of their pitchers, Smeltzer, they called up, who never got an appearance. And I wish that could have been a spot where they got Kirilloff in and at least got him a couple warm-up swings, let him get a little bit of major league action. But I mean, it didn't look like he was super rusty out there, so I don't know that would have made a huge difference. He looked like he belonged. He put a huge swing, 105 miles an hour exit velocity on his single, and his other plate appearances I thought were solid. When you had the bases loaded, he worked, was it a full count, something similar to that, and he put together a good plate appearance. So I thought Kirilloff was good, and it certainly gets you excited about the future, but I don't think we're in the spot right now that we want to be looking to the future. We wish we could be focusing more on the present and looking to a game tomorrow, which unfortunately we can't do.
Yeah, and we want to cry in our post-game pint. So if you're also want to leave your comments of what you're drinking, again, I'm going with the Diet Dr. Pepper because it's in the afternoon, but I fully understand if people need a post-game pint or 2 or 3, but if you have too many, don't drive. And only do so if you know. Matthew, your thoughts on Kirilloff, but also the decision today. Kind of adding to that, what were your thoughts on not giving him an opportunity either this weekend or earlier in the season?
Yeah, obviously that makes it a little bit tougher to see him come in and be called upon today when you didn't do it at all during the regular season, because you just didn't know exactly what you had. But the Twins, seemingly, from all their remarks, and it even showed up in the games today, it shows up in profiles, scouting reports of Kirilloff. They just trusted that this is a guy who can hit. He can hit at the big league level. He wasn't going to be cowed by big league pitching, even playoff caliber pitching. And without fans in the stands and the whole sort of weird atmosphere around this season, I don't think they were too worried that he was going to be overwhelmed by any of that. Still, I don't know. Jake Cave has been playing well lately. And at this point, when you had a full game to play, and had to make the choice of someone's going to go out there and play the outfield in addition to being somewhere in the middle to the back end of the lineup, I think I might have just gone with Cave But since they had Kirilloff on the roster, and like Rocco said, he didn't intend to just have him come and sit around, I guess you might as well see what happens, because Cave, even though he's been playing better lately, it's not like he's taken the lineup and turbocharged everyone around him. So I think it was a 50-50 call. Again, not the thing that cost you the game. It's just another of the many things that added up to cost you the game.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, Kirilloff definitely did fine. He had the hit, and he had a nice catch out in the outfield, had another nice catch. And they, even late in the game, had a nice throw showing off his strong arm, even, at 3 years now after Tommy John surgery. So, I think it's exciting to think the future. I guess I didn't have a problem with it. Cave's been terrific. I want to say his OPS in the last month has been about, I don't know, 870, 850, something like that, which is obviously very good. Defensively, he's fine. He could have played center and kept Kepler in right, but I don't mind that. Go big. I mean, I think, the decision is not the easy one to go with Kirilloff. The easy decision would have been to go with Cave. So I actually kind of admire, or I appreciate the decision to go to Kirilloff, because that's your big home run play. I mean, that's the going for it play. So I really don't have a problem with it. And like I said, I think Kirilloff, he did fine. It was just like we said, it's an unfortunate situation, but also an exciting opportunity when he comes up in the first inning with the bases loaded. Let him see what happens. I think his cool and his calm is some of what they really like about him. I want to kind of branch off here, and welcome questions and comments as they go here, but kind of not baseball. We'll lighten it up here for just a second. What are your thoughts? And we'll start with Mr. Trueblood on this one. The in-game interviews with the manager and a player. I'm not even going to leave my thoughts before I ask. Go ahead. What are your thoughts on that?
They're killing me with these things. I mean, first of all, I don't know that it's appropriate, and I definitely don't think it's likely to add to the broadcast in any case, because as fun as it can be when humor sort of happens organically within a broadcast, when a broadcast sets out to generate things like the booth yucking it up with a player who's wired up or something, it never comes off very well. It just sounds like a bunch of men laughing as the soundtrack to a baseball game. And I'd rather just have a broadcast where you can talk about something substantive, you can talk about something fun, you can throw it to a sideline reporter. And I think the fact that they couldn't do stories on fans in the stands, a family member who traveled from out of town to see a player, things like that, they wanted to get a little more creative and find human interest this year. But these things just do not work. The manager interviews are so trite because the manager needs to be managing, and he doesn't really want to talk to the booth. He's not going to give away any valuable information to the booth. So it becomes these very canned few questions and, okay, we'll let you go. The player interview with Nelson Cruz like overflows with charisma. And it sort of even worked in, I think it was the Sunday night game last week when they did it. It kind of worked because Nelson Cruz can make something like that work. But this time, half of it was just Nelson Cruz like nervously shifting his weight and when the interview would start. They've got to cut these things out. They're just awful. Awful.
Muted.
I caught myself. I think we have a pretty good idea of how Mr. Trueblood feels. So how about you?
Yeah, I also was very vocal about my disdain for these post-game interview or in-game interviews. Sorry. I think it's just terrible. It adds nothing to the broadcast. Like Trueblood was saying, I learned absolutely nothing from those interviews. I don't think any fans did. And it was just so the Rocco one was bad, but at least they kept that one fairly short. And it might have just been that the inning was short as well. But Nelson Cruz's, it just pained me to watch him go through it. He clearly did not want to be watching it. His team was that was when the Twins gave up the first run at the time as well. And so Nelson was clearly not in the right place. And the broadcasters were asking him about it, like, "Oh, Nelson, you didn't seem to like that walk. What do you think?" And clearly he doesn't want to talk about that. He's worrying about his team. He's on the brink of elimination. He doesn't have a contract next year. He's got a lot of things on his mind. And of course he doesn't want to be going through this. So fans don't want to watch it. Players don't want to go through it. Just get rid of him.
My point would be, you've got Zoom. Why are they not doing these pregame or something like that? And they can like do little clips throughout the game. I mean, that's what the whole pregame show is for. I just don't think they make any sense. Now, don't get me wrong, Dusty Baker was hilarious. I mean, they can be fun, but you're right, that Nelson Cruz one was just awkward. So I don't really see any value of it. We're going to continue kind of talking through the game here. My name is Seth Stoes, along with Matthew Trueblood, Matthew Taylor, all from twinsdaily.com. We definitely encourage you to go to the site and check out what's going on there and leave your comments if you like. And again, we'll take your questions and comments here on Twitter, whether you're watching on Twitter, Periscope, Facebook, YouTube Live, whatever you would like. Feel free to send us your questions. We'll get them up here. I want to go to the Cruz double real quick and sending Arise home. And Arise is not fast. He's a middle infielder, but he's not fast. I originally didn't have a problem with sending him because with Brooks Raley on the mound, not saying he's great, but he does generally dominate left-handed batters. You got Rosario coming up. I felt like it was a good risk, and it was fairly close. Am I, again, being a homer or something and thinking that it was an okay risk in that timing for Tony Diaz to send Arise? What do you think, Mr. Taylor?
I think the Twins were in the position where their offense was generating nothing the entire game, and Tony Diaz was almost forced to send Arise and just hope for a missed throw, which they got the missed throw, and he was still out by a decent amount. Maybe with an incredible slide, Arise could have made it, but if the throw was on the money like most throws should be, he would have been very clearly out. The throw was off, and he was still out, so I don't think it was the correct send just because of that. Sure, you can say it was good to be aggressive, but when you're out by a decent amount on a bad throw, I think that makes it a poor send. You can't just be aggressive for the sake of being aggressive. You still have to be looking at the situation and knowing your runner. And so I don't think that it was the right throw. Again, that's not why they lost the game, but like True Blood was saying, all these decisions add up. So I don't think it was the right throws. Or the right decision to send him.
Speaking of Mr. Trueblood, what did you think at that time? It's certainly a topic that's been covered a lot by the Twins in our discussions all year and last year with Tony Diaz being maybe overly aggressive at times.
Yeah, no, I love Tony Diaz's aggressiveness. One of my colleagues at Baseball Prospectus, Russell Carlton, has proposed, tongue-in-cheek, of course, but that you just replace your third base coach with a cardboard sign and write on it and marker run, because most of the time that's the good advice. And with 2 outs, it goes double, and with a lefty due up to face a tough lefty as the next batter, it goes triple. I mean, Arias is slow at his best, and slowed right now by a knee that we know is still not fully right. He is not even very athletic on the bases when it comes to things other than speed. Like, you knew that you weren't going to get some kind of jackknife slide around the tag from Luis Arias in that situation too. But even so, I think it was a good send on balance. It was unlikely that it was going to pan out, but it was also very unlikely that Eddie Rosario was going to come up with a hit as the next batter if you held him. So obviously you wish it had gone just a little bit differently, but the fact that it was as close as it was, given how the prospects for the next plate appearance looked, tells me it was probably a coin flip of a call, and I like the aggression.
Yeah, again, I tend to like aggressiveness early, especially at that point. I really felt like they needed that type of a jolt. And again, Brooks Raley is not like great, but he's been really great this year against lefties. And it's so weird, thinking that he was quote unquote property of the Twins for about an hour and a half one year, about 5 or 6 years ago, when the Twins claimed him as a DFA guy. So it is kind of, it's not an easy thing, but real quickly, I got to say hi, Josie. Hi, daughter. How are you? Hope you're enjoying the show. I'm sure you are. All right, I will continue now. She posted that 3 times to make sure I showed one of them, I bet. I want to talk about Eddie Rosario. Unfortunately, his final at bat as a Twin may, depending on what happens this offseason, have resulted in a bad strikeout and a really bad ejection. I'm going to start with mine. At the time, I didn't necessarily even mind it because it was a 3-1 pitch that was a little bit high, at least according to the box that they show. Clearly, it was not a strike, but it also wasn't the worst call ever. I thought you could just see what was going to happen. And Eddie, I think in a normal situation, you'd say he deserved to get tossed. But looking back at what George Springer did and said to the ump and carried into not only the rest of that inning, but his next at bat, and Eddie gets ejected within about 10 seconds of saying anything, that was the part that bothered me more than anything else. That said, I 100% agree with everyone. I mean, that's not the time to get ejected. You have to find a way to stay cool. And I'm not going to say that's easy. When you're in the game and you feel like you have done your job and you have the bat essentially taken out of your control, but you got to stay in the game because he did come up. That spot in the lineup came up again, and Jake Cave, who you never know. I mean, he could have homered or something. You never know, but that spot came up, and he may or may not have cost the team the game. So, and again, I don't. That was too dramatic to say that it may have cost the team the game, but who knows what happens going forward there. And I think we're on Mr. Trueblood. What were your thoughts on the situation and how that played out?
Sorry, took me a second to unmute. I mostly blame Manny Gonzalez, honestly. I think umpires are much too quick with the hook in general these days, and that was a very good example of an umpire being way too quick with the hook. I don't know exactly what Rosario said, but he didn't have time to say enough that you should have thrown of an elimination playoff game in that setting. This isn't the way it's always been. It's a relatively recent phenomenon that umpires will develop such a quick trigger and throw a guy out just for the slightest argument about something like that, especially when they need to know that emotions are running high. Not necessarily excusing Rosario. And down the road, maybe MLB can come up with something where instead of being ejected and that being kind of the only recourse an umpire has if a player is disrespecting them, maybe you can have a strike assessed on the next batter or a ball if it's the pitching team, something like that. But one way or another, the league needs to clean this up. Umpires are running players way too readily, trying to assert some kind of power over them that technically they have, but it doesn't. That's not what anyone's there to see. And, it's not just that, but it's also, I don't know, you have a right to not be treated awfully at your workplace, but you also don't have the right to totally control your workplace and say that no one else gets to feel frustrated, especially when you're there mostly as a facilitator of their job.
Very interesting points. Thank you. How about you, Mr. Taylor? I know you were tweeting throughout that, so go ahead and share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think my piece of frustration is just the unfairness of it, and that earlier in the game, George Springer, like you said, we didn't hear exactly what they said, but it certainly appeared that his reaction was much worse than Eddie Rosario's was, and it was much more prolonged than Eddie's was. It was a prolonged discussion at the plate after the strike call, which I should say was also a terrible strike call on George Springer. And then it continued for the entire half inning of George Springer just chirping at this umpire over and over and over again. And the ump didn't even look at him, didn't communicate with him, didn't give him any type of warning. And then it turned into tightening up the strike zone afterwards. So he took George Springer's chirping and he listened to him and he tightened up the strike zone as a result. And then as soon as Eddie starts to chirp just a little bit, hooks him right away. Doesn't even give Eddie a chance to walk back to the line or back to the dugout. And maybe it's because we know who Eddie is, but Eddie just doesn't seem like a guy who would say anything too terribly or hold on to something too long. So just doesn't seem like the right thing to do in that place, especially given that it's the postseason. It's an elimination game. It's in the later stages of the innings of an elimination game in the postseason. Extremely frustrating.
Yeah, and as Mike Link mentions via YouTube, thank you for the comments. Electronic strike zones removes that element. I would add too that it probably looked worse in Rosario's case because what the bad call there would have been ball 4. So of course Rosario starts running down the base, and the ump immediately tells him to get back in. That's the difference. Whereas Springer's was strike 3, so he of course just stands there. It may have looked worse to the ump because Rosario took off, but I mean it was ball 4. That's what he was assuming was going to happen. So I do like this idea from Hannah, and we'll post that up here. She says, "I like the idea of umps wearing a buzzer, and it buzzes when they get a call wrong, so they know." I wonder how high you would turn up that frequency at certain times, or if it misses by like 6 inches or 8 inches and they call it a strike. I mean, it just zaps them like crazy or something. What do you guys think? No, I mean, I go back and forth on the electronic strike zone. I've more and more every year become more in favor of it. But I also like the idea of catchers having a role in the game, and what Ryan Jeffers is doing right now behind the plate is pretty impressive, getting a lot of good calls. So, I mean, not to dive too far into this, but Matt Taylor, are you pro or con, or pro or against electronic strike zone?
I'm more pro than against. I think I'm pro strike zone. I would be more of a fan of doing a tennis type challenge situation where it's a quick 30 seconds. You get 5 challenges per game. Eddie Rosario, he could have called for a challenge on that one. Quickly, they went to StatCast, saw that it was actually a strike per StatCast. I know the ESPN broadcast was a little different than the StatCast strike zone, but do something like that. But if it was between a electronic strike zone or not, I would prefer the electronic strike zone for sure.
And I think that might be the biggest argument against the electronic strike zone. If StatCast is different than Fox's box is different from all these others, then what's the right one? And how do you make sure that that's called as well? Mr. Trueblood, your overall thoughts on the electronic strike zone?
I am probably a little more against it than for it, but again, it's one of those where I'm open to both sides. The accuracy, the increased accuracy would be nice, but there are a lot of ways in which we've kind of defined what a strike is in a way that's meant to accommodate the fact that humans are calling the strike zone, and we would have to change that if we came up with a non-human called strike zone. There would have to be some kind of objective parameters, not the hollow of the knee, because a computer doesn't know what the hollow of the knee is. And I think it would change a lot of things about the interaction between pitcher and catcher and umpire. Take some of the fundamental underpinnings of baseball out from under it. I'm not a just have the human element for the sake of the human element kind of guy, but I don't know. We already risk a little bit of over digitization when it comes to modern baseball. The game we play is a little more stultified, a little more robotic than it used to be even now. So I worry about that change, but it may be becoming necessary just because it seems like as pitchers get better and better at manipulating the ball, creating nasty movement and throwing harder than ever, that it's getting too hard for umpires to call a good strike zone.
And Hannah wants to clarify. To be clear, I'm against electrocution and pro giving the umps a heads up for future calls. It's a good distinction there. I think that's fair. Hey, those of you listening, thank you for joining. We're going to continue here for a little bit, starting to talk a little bit more about just very high level on where do we go from here, but also taking any questions, comments you want to have as far as this game, this series, this season, prospects, whatever you want to talk about, let us know. The last thing on this that I kind of want to bring up is the thing that I get so frustrated with as I'm watching the Twins in the playoffs this year, and it was the same last year, and it was the same 3 years ago, and it was probably the same in 2004. I get annoyed by everything when I'm watching these games because, it could be as simple as, Karl Ravitch saying, or maybe I should say it, the same as Karl Ravitch saying the names or pronouncing the names of all the Twins players wrong, like Barrios and Stashak and stuff like that. But it's also, again, the Springer situation. Springer yells as much as he wants and chews things out, the ump out, and Eddie Rosario says anything and he's gone. But also, I mean, it just even goes to the umpiring. And actually, this is a good one. I think Martin brings this up. Tim Timmons' buzzer would have been broken today after back-to-back missed calls. It's those little things, like the umps almost, it feels like, wanted the Astros to get the call, which is so weird because you think everyone's anti-Astros. But as a Twins fan at this stage, it's like we all just feel like everyone's up against us when it comes to the playoffs. So I don't know. I guess frustrating would be the word that comes to mind for me first, Mr. Trueblood. You said deflating earlier, but what word comes to mind as you just kind of talk through all of these little things that like add up?
Yeah, frustrating is the easiest one for sure. It's just, it's unfortunate. These are the things that we talked about all year in a sense. So maybe it's a little different than in some of those other seasons where it felt like problems emerged out of nowhere or really bad luck just suddenly gripped the team and steered it into the winter. This year, we kind of saw all this. We kind of knew that the lineup was not what it was last year and things weren't coming together the way you hoped they would. And even when one guy would get hot, well, another would get cold and another would get hurt. Those things kept happening in rotation. So it's hard to feel that surprised. I picked the Twins to win this series. I expected them to have a better run than this. And yet it's hard to feel surprised because these are the things that were happening all along. So maybe that's the most painful part at this point is that this was foreseeable. And yet you didn't want to foresee it just because you told yourself, well, that wasn't who this team is. The team from last year is who it is. The fact that they won the AL Central is who they are, and that'll show up. Well, it didn't. So now we're back to square one.
Yeah, kind of in the same line, Matthew. I mean, how do you sum up this series and the feelings you got and the frustrations and all of that?
Yeah. Sorry, my dog is barking.
Oh, I thought that was you. You were really talking about it. Wow.
Yeah, I think the most frustrating thing is just that that they finally got their pitching in order this year, and that's what it always been. Can he pitch? Can he pitch? Can he pitch? They finally got the pitching, and just the hitting wasn't there. And it's just, what do you do? It seemed like everything was lined up this year. They got the right decision makers in place. You have the right roster in place. You finally get your ace pitcher in Maeda. You finally get Barrios to, give you another great start in game 2, and things still don't come together. So I think it's more of a question of what do we do?
It's the dog days, I tell you. Hey, I just put up a tweet from Trevor May that says, I owe everything to Minneapolis and I wouldn't trade my time here for anything, which, of course, Trevor May is one of those guys. He will be a free agent at the end of the World Series. And you just kind of wonder, will he come back? We've talked about Eddie Rosario. Is he traded or non-tendered? We've talked about, Sergio Romo, Tyler Clippard. There are a lot of free agents on this roster. Marwin Gonzalez, Nelson Cruz. I mean, there's a lot of question marks as we head into this offseason. And kind of to team in with Jeffrey Hoffman here, who says, how do the Twins move forward from here? Something has to change. We've rotated managers, players, front office, added a large analytics department, and most coaches over the last 15 years. I'll give my answer real quick, and just you guys can agree or disagree. It's so hard to know what happens in a 2-game series or a 3-game series or a 5-game series relative to the 162, and people hate when I say that. But how else do we want to go forward? I mean, you can't just change managers every time you lose in the playoffs. We'll start with Taylor this time.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Seth, and that's where I've always been. And you just always say, oh, it's just, baseball is more luck than any other sport, or more of a coin flip than any other sport. And eventually the coin is going to turn up heads, and it's just year after year after year. It doesn't turn up heads, and you start to wonder, is something else going on? You turn over the entire regime, where now, of course, Nelson Cruz doesn't care about what the 2006 Twins did, but then when it just keeps happening, you do question, like, is there something more going on here? And obviously there's no curse or things like that, but I think all you can really do is use your analytics, trust in your processes, put the best roster that you have together, and just trust that over time processes are going to drive results. I think that the Twins have the right decision makers in. I think any of the talk about firing Rocco is ridiculous. I think they have the right front office. They have the right manager. I think they have the right pieces in place. They have the right young guys. I think this is going to turn around, but we've also said that for the last 20 years. So I'll let Trueblood give us the magic answer here.
Yeah, Mr. Trueblood, your turn. But before you do that, I've got a tweet up here now. Bill Young Park tweeted a quote from Nelson Cruz saying, hopefully I'll be back next year. And I think we all agree. That's definitely a topic we'll cover throughout the off season. But, again, what are your thoughts, Mr. Trueblood, on the willingness or the want by many, understandably, to try something different or to change something again?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people have to worry about that too much. There's going to be a lot of change on this team this offseason. In fact, there may be more change coming than people would prefer, or not. At this point, I think, like you say, a lot of fans are going to be ready for changes, but whether they're ready for them or not, changes are coming. May and Clippard and Romo, Rich Hill and Jake Odorizzi are free agents. Cruz and Marwin Gonzalez. And, I think there are going to be questions. Obviously, the number one question people are going to be talking about is, do they trade Eddie Rosario to clear room for Alex Kirilloff and or Trevor Larnach? And I think the answer is going to be yes. But that doesn't necessarily clear your entire logjam, and it doesn't necessarily solve some of the problems that have kept cropping up and have specifically cropped up and bitten them in their last two postseason runs. I think they're going to have to seriously weigh whether they can ever count on Byron Buxton to stay healthy for long enough to be the guy that we all know he can be. We see the talent. The talent is prodigious. The talent is Hall of Fame caliber. But he's compromised by his inability to stay healthy. And at this point, health is a skill. There's no moral failing. There's nothing to blame Byron Buxton for in the fact that he repeatedly gets hurt, but he repeatedly gets hurt. And I think if you're waiting for him to stay healthy and play 100, even 145 games some season and just be utterly undented, you're waiting in vain. And can the Twins afford to do that anymore? Especially as Max Kepler gets a little bit older and he's not quite the solid center fielder who can slide over if Buxton gets hurt that he used to be. Especially if Nelson Cruz departs in free agency, that will really hurt the lineup. But it would at least make some things easier, because then you can sometimes put Miguel Sano at first base at DH to give him half a day off and hopefully keep him fresher, because clearly he struggles in that same way with staying healthy. If Cruz stays, then you've got to wonder how you're going to keep Sano and Donaldson healthy on a regular basis throughout 162 game seasons. There are a lot of questions here. And so I think you should expect a whole lot of change. It'll probably even be uncomfortable change, but unfortunately, I think it's also necessary change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And some of that's just natural. Like you said, it's free agents, it's guys getting opportunities, it's things like that. Rick Moulton left a comment here a while ago that, it says predictable, talking about the series. Serious problems seem to be going on in the background, and I don't know if that's necessarily true. But to your point, hope the young guys get their chance next year. Rooker, Kirilloff, Lewis, Duran, And I think a lot of those guys will get those opportunities next year. Certainly Kirilloff and Rook are big leaguers. Duran is very close. Lewis maybe a little further off, but he played at Double-A last year. He could very easily be up at some time next year. So I think there's some of that. My concern is that people think that making these moves makes the team better on their own. And as much as we have talked about Eddie Rosario, trading him and getting a middle reliever doesn't make the team better, because we don't know if Larnach or Kirilloff are going to put up the numbers that Rosario has, or certainly you're not going to put up the numbers Nelson Cruz has put up, no matter who you put out there. So just by going to the younger players doesn't immediately make them better, even though I think we all agree on how things need to run in a baseball organization. That's just the natural progression from year to year, unfortunately. And that's my big concern, is they can make all the right moves in the offseason. That doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. One more time before we go for about the final 10, 15 minutes, I want to again thank everyone for listening. I want to thank people for leaving questions. Let's again, we'll take any more, but I do want to thank also SodaStick. Go to sodastick.com, check out their t-shirts, their merchandise. We really appreciate them sponsoring the final weekend of the regular season. And unfortunately, just 2 playoff games, but we appreciate that. Go to sodastick.com, make your purchase, use the promo code TwinsDaily, all one word, and get free shipping. So again, thank you very much. Matthew brought it up briefly, and I want to give Matt Trueblood an opportunity to respond to it. I've gotten a lot of people saying they need to fire Baldelli. Now, again, that's hashtag Twins Twitter often, and I think we would all agree that that's not necessarily true. But I am curious. Let's start with Matt Trueblood. Your thoughts on that whole concept, that whole thought process, and frankly, what more could he have done in this series, in your opinion, to have motivated them to score more runs?
Yeah, I don't see any need to move on from Rocco Baldelli at this point. I think you just won back-to-back division titles in his only 2 years as a manager. The primary job of a manager is keeping a clubhouse together, managing all the information that's coming down from a front office in this day and age, delegating well to coaches who are hired as specialists to continue and develop players at the big league level. And Rocco does all of those things extremely well. Now, I don't think he managed either of these games all that well from a tactical perspective. But I also think that's something that most managers will improve upon over time. So if you already have a guy who does the most important things you ask a manager to do as well as he does them, and his only shortfall is that he doesn't make perfect in-game strategic decisions, I'm going to keep that guy and figure that I can either bring in a bench coach who specializes in that to advise him, or just roll with it and understand that he'll improve upon that as he gains more experience managing the moments and the situations within a game. I don't think Baldelli cost the Twins either of these games. I think he was dealing, playing the hand he was dealt. No Josh Donaldson, a limited Byron Buxton, a hobbled Luis Arraez, a just right now offensively broken Miguel Sano. Baldelli didn't do any of that. And maybe you're hoping that a manager or a hitting coach or a pair of them can more rapidly bring a guy out of an offensive funk or something. I'm sympathetic to that, but there's no magic wand to wave to make that happen. And just last year, the Twins were maybe the best team in the league at those kinds of things. So I don't think you make change just for change's sake. If there's a coach where internally they're hearing from players or other coaches that some ball is being dropped in the processes that are vital to being prepared for a game on a daily basis, then you can make a change. But I don't see any indication of that from the outside, and I probably wouldn't go looking to make changes to this coaching staff.
Very good points. I do have from Mike Graybill a comment. Sergio Romo, what about Tony Romo? Can we pin any of this on him? And we'll hide that as we let Matthew Taylor give his thoughts on the Twins manager. And maybe, again, I think we can all agree. in-game tactician. Is he the best? I don't necessarily think so, but a lot of what he's doing is based on the research and all of that. And then some of it does have to be gut feel. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on Baldelli? Is there any reason whatsoever to even have this conversation other than we're looking for things to talk about as the season comes to a very abrupt end here with another Twins loss in the playoffs?
No, I don't think so. I think we just got through a 6 or 7 year span where we had 100 losses every single season, and we were coming off back-to-back division titles, 100 wins last year and division title this year, and you lost in a 3-game wild card series. But that is not a reason to fire your coach. I agree with everything Trueblood said. I think the job of a manager, like Trueblood said, is to put your team in the best position to succeed, and the players clearly like Rocco. They clearly respect him. They enjoy playing for him, and he's going to continue to improve. And there's no need to make a rash decision off of a 3-game series. I think it's going to be interesting. I think the issue is that 2020 was, I think, the perfect storm of, you had everything going. You had your young guys that were starting to step up. You just opened up your pocketbooks for Josh Donaldson. You have Nelson Cruz, who's probably on his last amazing season, and it just didn't work out. And now you're going into next season, and the White Sox are going to be better, and the Royals and Tigers are inevitably going to start getting better as well. And it's just tough that things didn't work out this year, but not tough enough to fire your manager, has one of the best 2-year stretches in managerial history of a new manager joining a team.
Yeah, he's got like a 61% win percentage in the regular season. Unfortunately, that has not yet carried into the postseason. And as Rennie said, at least we didn't lose to the Yankees. And if someone posted to me on my personal Twitter account, the Twins season is over and the Cardinals are in the second inning. So that's fantastic. Here's a question. Let's start talking a little bit more baseball here. We got a question from DNF74. I don't know if that's the real name or not, but let's start with Matt Taylor on this one. How long can they keep Polanco at shortstop? You just can't pick it there long term, in my opinion. Polanco actually had a pretty good year at shortstop, just one really bad play in game one. But overall, your thoughts on Polanco at shortstop and maybe the timeline on how long he's there. Is he a guy they can consider moving in the offseason, or does his contract kind of keep him around?
I think Polanco is going to be at shortstop until Royce Lewis is able to fill that spot. I think if you have Royce Lewis in the minor leagues who is putting up excellent numbers and is ready to go in there, I don't think the Twins are going to hold Royce Lewis back from getting called up. I think it's the type of thing where once Royce Lewis is called up, you bring him up and you figure out what to do then. I think Polanco, it was weird with him. I don't know if it's the ankle, if it was just a change in approach or what was going on with him, but it was a completely different player that we saw this year, where last year he was hitting it into the gap. He was hitting doubles, extra base hits. He hit 20-some home runs, and this year he just showed a completely different approach at the plate, and he was not looking for anything other than singles and batting average. And so it'll be an interesting case. I mean, he's still an asset. It was 60 games. We can't necessarily judge him totally on a 60-game sample, but as soon as Royce Lewis is up, I mean, he's the shortstop of the future, and then you are just going to have to figure out what to do with Polanco at that point.
Mr. Trueblood, your thoughts on Polanco? I know you've written quite a bit about him this season, and obviously something was missing with the bat, but I actually thought defensively he had made some ground up this year. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I can't seem to count on that button today. I do think he improved defensively, and that's important. That's helpful. I never was a big believer in the power, even when he was showing it. And, that kind of peaked around the middle of last year. And then even in the second half of 2019, he wasn't showing a lot of that pop. And just the sort of the underlying numbers.
I'm not hearing him either, Seth.
Okay. I was wondering if it was just me.
Not you.
All right. Well, we'll get Matthew back here in just a second. I don't know if he's got a bad connection or not, but I want to jump to this question from Justin Bream, and we'll get Matthew Trueblood on when we get a second. But Matt, your thoughts? It says, sorry if this has already been asked, but is Edgar Varela's job safe? Offense massively underperformed. I would add that Edgar Varela took the hitting coach job this year from James Ralston, who became the bench coach and hitting coordinator with the Marlins. But he and Rudy Hernandez are both essentially co-hitting coaches. So I feel like instead of just Varela, we should just be discussing both Varela and Rudy Hernandez. Anything to that thought? Anything that you saw that said, aside from the numbers dropping this year, that the hitting coaches should be their jobs should be in jeopardy?
Yeah, I'm sure there's more analytics that we could look into to figure out exactly what the difference is in the swings and if it is a hitting coach type thing. I've been consistent all year that I don't necessarily think it's the hitting coaching that's been the issue. I think the hitting philosophy has been the same throughout the organization. I think Varela has worked with a lot of the minor leaguers that have come up, and the hitting declines that you've seen out of guys like Polanco and Kepler, they had their massive spike because of Edgar Varela. So I don't necessarily think that he's the issue, but it also does seem like if you are going to make a change for change's sake and try to mix things up, a hitting coach would be an easy way to do that. So I guess I would much rather make that change than making the change for Rocco Baldelli. Seems like more of a wise thing to do, but I don't necessarily know that that's going to make a big difference.
Mr. Trueblood, welcome back. The question here was basically, we've kind of given our thoughts on Baldelli's job security. What about the hitting coaches? Varela is mentioned in this question, but Rudy Hernandez has been around a long time too.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to judge. I guess not judge them because you're judging them on much more. They've been around the organization. But I would not want to make a decision to part ways with them over non-performance over 60 games. Especially from a lot of players that we know were dealing with various health issues, sometimes even while still in the lineup. Not only was it only 60 games, but it was these 60 games, right, under very strange circumstances. Just not a great environment to evaluate either players or coaches' performance. So my inclination would be to stick with them. We know that Hernandez has been a part of hugely successful offensive work. Varela has a really good reputation within and beyond the organization. I'm not parting ways with them at this point, and I think I'm going to count on coming back next year with a full off season, hopefully a full spring training and a relatively normal ramp up to the season, and hopefully also some healthier players, maybe a few new faces, and just give that another try, because I don't think that it was a failure of coaching, instruction, or even player development that led to the dip in offense this year. Some of it's just regression, and a lot of it is the strangeness and sort of the vagaries of 2020.
And here's one question I don't know that I've asked enough this year. I don't know that it has been asked enough this year. Twins hit a ton of home runs last year with what everyone knows is a essentially juiced baseball. Nobody was talking about a juiced baseball this year. You kind of wonder if they went back to an old ball, and that may have had as much impact on OPSs across baseball dropping like crazy than anything else. But then you add in, like you said, a delayed or a second off season essentially with the shutdown, and I mean just so many other factors go into it. Plus 60 games, yeah, you would hope a hitting coach would get more than 60 games to make his mark, and especially when Josh Donaldson played in, I think, less than half of them, and Buxton missed time. And, we've seen in the past, Sano can struggle for a while and then just take off. So I just feel like now just isn't the time. It would feel a little bit too, just jumping into something a little bit too quick. Let's just take a look. In fact, here, Stephen Pincus says, Twins were hurt by the loss of James Ralston this year. Need to look at the situation with hitting coaches. Yeah, and we've probably should have included this comment a little bit ago, but I think it's a fair question. But again, I think our general assessment is is 60 games probably isn't enough to make a full opinion on that. Mike Link says Paul Molitor was manager of the year and he was fired less than 2 years later. Okay, that might have been a slightly different situation with a new front office that was forced to keep Molitor for a while, but so be it. Let's go with this one. Rennie, it felt like he played all the right analytics, but we were just the most unlucky in these few games. Balls kept seeming to find holes that weren't hit that hard. I mean, you look at Sergio Romo's outing where he gave up 2 bloop singles, and even Taylor Rogers until that infield in single, the balls he gave up weren't hit real hard. So I think we can all agree that short series, just weird stuff happens. But here's a question I think you guys will enjoy, and we'll go with Mr. Trueblood to start this one. Do the Twins open up the wallet again this offseason, and who do they go after? Trevor Bauer?
It's really hard at this point, at least, to predict who, if anyone, is going to be opening a wallet this offseason. We know that it's going to be a strange offseason. Probably there's not going to be a lot of money out there for a lot of the free agents who hit the market. We may see more free agents hitting the market as teams who are locked into pretty high salaries on players with arbitration figures attached to them just non-tender those players. And given that the Twins made a big splash this past year and were really I think the only team or close to the only team in the league who have not laid off staff or made significant cuts that way throughout this season. Unfortunately, I think that probably means you should expect them to be pretty tight with the purse this winter. Certainly there's a relationship there between Derek Falvey and Trevor Bauer that makes it a possibility, but I wouldn't put the Twins on my top 5 list of the most likely destinations for Bauer. I wouldn't put them on a list of the top 5 most likely destinations for any free agent who comes to mind at the moment, any top tier free agent at least. And that can be okay. They're really good at finding bargains. We've seen that. We know what they did with Matt Whistler this year. They can work around that and still improve this team through the trade market, especially if they decide to get active there, and through good development of the young guys. But I wouldn't expect any major free agent type additions unless the market is so depressed that you can get a high caliber player really without spending much money at all.
How about you, Matthew Taylor? I guess we can speak to Bauer, but just in theory, do you see the Twins spending this offseason? And do they need to?
Yeah, I'm there with Trueblood that I'm not sure anybody is. And I think a big part of that is that we don't even know in 2021 if we're going to have fans in the stands or what that's going to look like. I think just given the nature of the world right now, it's still hard to imagine packing 40,000 fans into a stadium every night for 81 nights a year. So there's going to still be much diminished revenue that's coming in for these ball clubs, and it's just hard to imagine them doing so. Even if revenue was normal, I think we were all surprised that the Twins finally ponied up for Donaldson this offseason. So in a normal year, it would be weird for them to do it again, and especially given the circumstances, it's just really hard to imagine them doing so once again. I think it's odd that we're talking about how challenged the offense is, but yet I think there's still not a ton of moves to necessarily be made on that side of the field. I think you're pretty locked into most of your roster. You're locked in at catcher, first base, second base, shortstop, third base, center field, right field. You have left field, but you're probably going to go to your prospects there, and then you'll have a decision to make at DH, but it's not, I don't think the Twins are going to sign some big DH if they let go of Nelson Cruz. And then it's going to be the starting rotation that you're looking at. I think outside of Maeda and Barrios, there's not much locked into the rotation for next season outside of, you have Randy Dobnak, and outside of that, you don't really know necessarily what. So they're going to have to sign a few pitchers, but I'm just not sure it's going to be the upper echelon talent of the free agents, and you're just going to have to hope that your in-house options come through next year.
And I agree with that on most of what you're saying. I would also add, too, that while I do agree with all of that, the probably depressed free agent market this offseason could potentially play into the Twins' hands because they aren't going to have the needs on the offensive side of the ball. And a guy like Trevor Bauer is not necessarily going to do the obvious. He's probably smart enough to realize that this particular offseason, he may be wise to, again, go to a one-year contract, which is something he's always said that he would want to do, which would put all teams into the picture together. And frankly, he seems like the kind of guy that isn't just going to pick the Yankees. He isn't just going to pick the Dodgers. He isn't just going to pick the obvious team. He's going to go to a place that he's going to want to be, and with someone, whether it's Felby or a player or something like that, I feel like the Twins have a chance there if the things play out the way we kind of expect. But I think expecting that probably isn't a good place to start your off-season hopes. So with that, we've kind of run through the list of questions. I think we've gotten through most of them, and we're sitting at 1 hour and 10 minutes. So with that, I'm going to give each of you guys one kind of final thought. And before I do that, I'm going to tell everyone, go to sodastick.com, buy a shirt or 7, because they're a lot of fun. We appreciate them supporting us, so feel free to go out and support them as well. Go to @SodaStickCo on Twitter. Be sure if you order something to use the promo code TwinsDaily, all one word, to get free shipping. Give you guys each about a minute here and just your final thoughts on either this series, the game, or kind of what you're looking forward to here as the offseason begins.
Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. Well, coming into this season, I know a lot of people didn't care very much whether the Twins won the American League Central or not, because of the expanded playoffs that were foisted upon us at the last moment. To me, that was always important. And a day like this is why I'm very glad that they did pull out the AL Central, even if it was a bumpy ride and maybe they needed some help at the end. This year was weird, and it really doesn't mean anything, ultimately, given everything that's going on in the world, but especially the pandemic. And the fact that it was only a 60-game season makes it very hard to draw conclusions. The fact that this was only a best-of-3 series makes it impossible to draw real, meaningful conclusions. But I'm glad the Twins won the division. I am glad that they pushed themselves enough to get that done, even though they weren't always pushing themselves that way. And ultimately, you have to seek ways to get meaning out of a season like this. And I think the fact that they were the best team over 60 games in this central, the 2 central divisions pod does mean something. And congratulations to the team on a great season. It's a very unfortunate ending. It's going to sting a lot. And this team's starting to be defined by postseason failure, which really sucks. But hopefully they can turn that around next year.
Well said, Mr. Trueblood. Your turn, Mr. Taylor. I had to say that twice because I forgot to unmute again.
Oh, my thoughts. Disappointed is just the word that keeps coming to mind. I think just disappointed in the circumstances, both of the world that we're living in right now and also the silly game that we all follow. It just came and went way too quickly. I hated the 60-game season. Part of what I love about baseball is just that it's 162 games and you get to count on it for so long. And it's just, we waited so long for the season, and then we only got 60 games, and then we were eliminated in 2 in the postseason. So it's just extremely disappointing to have to now wait another 6 months for baseball again. And just disappointing for, the guys that might leave, disappointing for a guy like Trevor May, disappointing for a guy like Nelson Cruz, Eddie Rosario, who have made such a mark on this club, but never got to experience any postseason success. So I think just disappointment all around is kind of how I'm feeling. And it's just the same every year that you think this team's going to be different. You think Kenta Maeda doesn't care about past postseason failures. You think Nelson Cruz doesn't care about past postseason failures, and the same things keep happening. So it's just a lot of disappointment all around. But overall, I'm surprised and happy that we were able to get this season in. And selfishly, as a this was my first season writing at Twins Daily as a Twins writer, so I just really appreciated the community and Twins Twitter and everything else as well. So thankful for the season, but bummed out with how it ended. You're muted again, Seth.
18 times so far this show I've done that. I've got up on the screen, Aaron Gleeman's posted some video, Jake Odorizzi on the mound after the game. Just, I'm not sure what he's doing. He just seems to be collecting his thoughts and just spending a little time at the mound. I don't know exactly what he's doing, but certainly interesting. You kind of feel bad for guys who put so much time and effort into the season. And, again, selfishly as a writer, we all want the team to do well. I mean, I realize that, it is what it is, and we have zero control over what happens in the game. But we all feel it as much as we hate to admit it, and we try to be unbiased and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we're fans at heart. So, it's disappointing. It's frustrating. Watching this happen every year is disappointing. I'm old enough to remember 87 and 91 and how much fun that was. And really, it hasn't been a lot of fun to watch these games since then. But I do appreciate what you guys have done. We've got some great writers who are contributing at Twins Daily, and will continue to do so throughout the off season. And hopefully you all will continue to go there. We've enjoyed doing these post-game pints really all season. I don't know. When we started it was just kind of, hey, let's see how it goes. But we kept adding it week after week after week. And fortunately, you guys have been a huge part of that. So we appreciate all that listened. And again, want to thank you all. Want to thank those of you who want. But I'm hoping, this is just me. I haven't even talked to Bonus or Nelson or anything about this. But I'm hoping every once in a while we can do some of these during the off season. Maybe I can do some interviews with players or minor leaguers and things like that in this format, because I think it's a lot of fun and I've enjoyed it all year. So again, thank you, Matthew Taylor. Thank you, Matthew Trueblood. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Again, thank you to Soda Stick. Head over there, use that Twins Daily promo code, all one word, to get some free shipping on some great merchandise. With that, the Twins lose 3-1. They lose the series to the Astros 2-0. I'm going to ask one last question, you guys. Will you be watching the playoffs the rest of the way, or are you like me and at this point you're just kind of done with baseball watching? For me, I'll just watch. I'll just be watching the game sevens and things like that. But what do you guys? Do you watch everything the rest of the way through? Matt, Trooper, or Taylor?
Yeah, I'll be watching the rest of the way. Now that the silliness of the expanded postseason has passed from the Twins side, I'm excited about all of the teams in the postseason and all the games that I'll get to watch. This year, I've sort of picked up the Padres as my second team and my National League team, so I'll be watching the Padres, and bummed out that they're not having that they don't have Clevenger or Lamet on their rotation. And I saw that the Brewers now don't have Williams on their staff either. So bummed with some of the players that we won't get to see this postseason, but excited for all the action, and we'll see what happens.
How about you, Matt Trueblood? Do you, I assume you keep busy both writing here at Twins Daily and elsewhere as well, right?
Yeah. I write for Baseball Prospectus. I write an email newsletter, do some freelance work. So I will be following the playoffs all the way through. And my other team, the Cubs, did not have a good game today. They're right on the brink of being next to the Twins on the way out of here. But I'll be watching, and it should be a fun postseason. I don't know that I want another one quite like it, but it's a wild and chaotic thing, and it should continue to be fun. It'll just be a bummer that it's happening without the Twins.
Yeah, those Marlins are doing a good job of whenever they do make the playoffs, they always do well, it seems, and it's been a long time. So we'll see if that carries beyond one game with their closer, Brandon Kinsler. So, again, thank you both. I appreciate all you've done throughout the year, and I thank everyone for listening. Have yourselves a great week, and we will continue to hopefully do something throughout the offseason. You know what to say. Do we say go Twins, or is that more of like go away at this point? But we'll continue to be here. So thanks again to everyone. Have yourselves a good night, and ta-da.
Thanks.